Welcome to this complimentary class on anxiety. I receive many questions on the topic of anxiety, so as promised, I have created a class describing the origins of anxiety and what you can do to have genuine inner peace. Personally, I have experienced anxiety throughout my entire life, with it reaching an acute stage while I was finishing high school and again when I was in my early 20s. I'm thrilled to share that it has been my use of the teachings in A Course in Miracles that have helped me to no longer be bothered by anxiety. One of the main reasons I was able to heal from anxiety was because I took full responsibility for my thinking. I knew that nothing was being done to me. I was the one doing it to myself. As we are taught in the Course, we are much too tolerant of mind wandering, and we are the ones who are passively condoning our mind's miscreations. And we are also taught in the Course that the key to salvation from the ego is but this: I am doing this unto myself. When you recognize that the anxiety you are experiencing is all because you are allowing your mind to wander, and you are allowing yourself to believe in every thought which pops in, you can begin to change this dynamic. Although it may not always feel like it, you are in control of your mind. And once you realize this, you are able to accept the incredibly powerful position that you are the decision maker. You are the one who decides what to believe in and how you want to continue thinking. As we are also taught in the Course, it's okay to have a negative thought. Just have none that you would keep. So I'm here to tell you that healing from anxiety is possible. And I'm also here to remind you, as always, that healing is natural. In this class, I will be sharing about the wrong mind of the ego, the right mind of the Holy Spirit, the ego mind's use of anxiety as a weapon against yourself, and the Course teachings and practical steps you can use so you can heal from anxiety. So let's get this class started so you can take your peace of mind back. Now, to begin, I will share why the Course can help you heal from anxiety. The Course, as you may or may not know, is a course in mind training. Throughout the text of the Course, the dynamics of the ego mind are described, and the reason for this is so we can recognize when we are thinking with the ego mind and then stop doing so. When you begin to see how you have been using your own mind against yourself, it's easier to stop doing that, and it simply becomes obvious and even desirable to think with the Holy Spirit instead. So in order to heal from the ego mind, you have to first learn why and how you are keeping the ego alive in your own mind. As a quick review, in this physical realm, we experience the mind as split. So it appears that we presently have two different minds which we are using. The minds available to us in the physical realm are the wrong mind of the ego and the right mind of the Holy Spirit. The ego mind keeps us entrenched in the thought system of fear and guilt, whereas our right mind connects us with the loving wisdom of spirit. It is through our continued use of our right minds that the ego mind is undone, and we become enlightened. So using our right minds is an incredibly important thing to do. In the Course, we are also given very clear guidance on what thoughts to apply so we can switch on over to our right minds. Now, the foundation of the ego mind is the insane idea that we believe we wanted to and did separate from our source. For this, we feel incredibly guilty, and that guilt manifests as anxiety and all other ideas and emotions which you would deem as negative. The right mind houses the Holy Spirit, also known as your higher self, and is the correction to that insane idea, reminding us that the separation from our source never occurred, and so there is no reason for us to feel guilty or afraid. And that is because nothing happened. We never separated from our source, and therefore there's nothing to feel guilty about. And so the Holy Spirit in our right mind sets us free by reminding us of our innocence. As both of these minds are always available for you to use, you are in the habit of using the ego mind. This is one of the reasons you settle for the ego, because you simply believe what it says as you are used to it. Through use of your right mind, the ego mind is undone and your loving, innocent, true identity becomes stronger in your awareness. It is through continued use of your right mind that the habit of anxiety will dissolve, as the ego's conflict and guilt is reduced in your mind. It is also helpful to note that your mind can only think one thought at a time, and so you are not able to think with both the ego and your right mind at the same time. It's important to remember that you can only be using one of the minds at any given time. Now let's go a little further into the source of anxiety and how it is sustained in your mind. The ego mind is the antithesis of peace and love. As long as you use your ego mind, you will experience conflict in some manner. Anxiety is an excellent example of inner conflict. As mentioned, at its core level, anxiety stems from your guilt over thinking that you wanted to and could leave your source, the God mind. This guilt is immense, and none of us are fully aware of it, as this guilt resides in our unconscious minds. This guilt creeps up to the surface of our minds, where we experience it as anxiety, depression, sadness, a lack of fulfillment, loneliness, and numerous other ways which you wouldn't really call guilt. But as we are taught in the Course, it is because of guilt that we suffer. So in order to calm anxiety, you need to undo the guilt in your mind. And I will be explaining how to undo guilt in a later slide. So that is the source of anxiety. Now let's move on to why anxious thoughts just don't seem to go away. Yes, it's because of the guilt in your mind that anxious thoughts creep in, but then there is the subject of what you do with an anxious thought when it pops up. If you're experiencing anxiety, that is because you have believed in the ego thoughts which pop into your mind. So guilt is why the anxious thought creeps into your awareness, and your belief gives the anxious thought its breath of life. All of your thoughts are given life through your belief in them. And by life, I mean they become serious to you. They become real ideas which you deem worth your attention. You keep the ego alive by believing in your thoughts instead of correcting them. It's important that you know that your thoughts only hurt you because you take them seriously. Just like the idea that you think you left your source, that idea only seems relevant to you because you believe it. Now, I know that some of your anxious thoughts may be about the health of your body or about other things that appear to happen in this world. And so you may be wondering, how can you be expected not to worry about things that could hurt you? And I do understand that concern. I've been there. So when we take a look at anxious thoughts, they all seem to have something to do with the body or someone else's body. We get anxious because something could happen to our body, or something could attack our identity, or that something could happen to our livelihood. Other times we can be anxious about something that could happen to the body of someone we love. All of our concerns and anxieties hover around the idea that we think we are a body. And there is another belief. We believe that we are just a body, and so we defend the body, or our personality, or both. Should we believe that anything could happen to our identity and our life circumstances, that causes us great anxiety. It's helpful to acknowledge that as Course students, we are being asked to question everything we presently believe, including the belief that we think we are a body. This is not supposed to be a painful process, but is typically experienced as such because we are so used to the identity we have, even if we like it or not. So our work with the Course is helping us to reframe what we truly are. We are being invited to expand our awareness and accept our true identity as being purely loving and innocent. Our true identity is formless and is where our perfectly healed mind connects to our identity as spirit, and the two essentially become one. Nothing can affect our true identity. I want to highlight that our detachment from the idea of being a body is a powerful one, but it's an idea which can be accepted gently and peacefully. With the Holy Spirit's guidance, we remember who we truly are, and we become less anxious about the body we've come to know. Now, the body itself is an experience of the mind, And so we cannot deny it, or else we would be denying the power of our minds. But we can repurpose what the body is used for. And that is, instead of using our body for the ego's purposes of defensiveness and attack, you can use your body for the Holy Spirit's purpose of being a loving communication device. You will find that as you begin to remind yourself of your true identity when you feel anxious, fear will lessen, and you will start to resonate with the idea that you are so much more than what this world would think you are. So in order to dissolve anxiety, you want to be careful as to where you are investing your belief, as it is through repetition that your thoughts become your beliefs. So you want to be mindful. And when using the course, do remember that all of your current beliefs will be brought up for question, but that's okay, because that's the beginning of the ego being undone in your mind. In the course, Jesus is sure to always emphasize the power of our minds, as it is through correct use of our minds that we will remember our true identity and let go of the ego identity. There is no other way to heal from the idea of fear. It is through your mind that you believe in fear, and it is through your mind that you will heal. Jesus shares the following powerful teaching in his course. If you hope to spare yourself from fear, there are some things you must realize, and realize fully. The mind is very powerful and never loses its creative force. It never sleeps. Every instant it is creating. It is hard to recognize that thought and belief combine into a power surge that can literally move mountains. Now, I know that there are some who may hear this quote and be scared, as you don't want your fear thoughts to manifest. Truly, it is your reaction to this quote that will show you that you don't trust yourself, or more specifically, you do not trust yourself to think correctly. This distrust of yourself stems from thinking that you left your source, and so you are afraid, on some level, that you will make a grave mistake in your thinking again. So to avoid the truth that our minds are powerful, we degrade the power of our minds and thoughts in hopes that we will avoid making another mistake, which we will feel horribly guilty about. Yet that is just hiding. To heal from anxiety, you must begin to acknowledge that you are powerful and that you have been using your mind against yourself. But we are also taught in the course that just as you choose the ego, you can choose the Holy Spirit, and therefore you are never stuck in your thinking. So now that you know the vital role your mind plays in your healing from anxiety, it is helpful to learn about what is called the ego paradox. As you may recognize, the ego is always trying to deceive you into thinking that you are powerless, helpless, hopeless, and that you are just a vulnerable body. Yet for as powerless as the ego tries to convince you that you are, the ego actually thrives off of your very powerful mind. Without your mind's power, the ego disappears. So anytime you recognize that you are anxious, remember that the ego is trying to use your own mind against you. And remember that anxiety need not be. You are incredibly powerful, and by unifying your mind with the Holy Spirit, you can begin to use your mind correctly and to your benefit. It's important to know that this choice is always available to you, and therefore you do not need to give in to the ego paradox anymore. It is always helpful to know why something is happening, and there is a reason you are experiencing anxiety. First, anxiety stems from an untrained mind. The mind is undisciplined and free to wander aimlessly. The real issue with this is you don't know not to take what the ego says as false. So as you have already learned, your mind wanders and you believe everything that the ego mind thinks. There is also an ego agenda to anxiety. The ego uses anxious thoughts as a distraction device. As mentioned, anxiety always has to do with fearing something that may happen in the future. And some of those fears about the future come from things which have happened in the past, and you're afraid will happen again. In this present moment, the thing which you are worrying about is not actually happening. You are just imagining that it is. And because your mind and your belief is so powerful, you react. Your mind is distracted by fear, and it is your body, which is an effect of your mind, that is physically expressing that fear. So your focus is always on fear and controlling your environment, so your fearful imaginings won't happen. The ego will always have you ignore the peacefulness of the present moment and will instead have you focus on the past and future. Why the ego does this is as a distraction device, so you don't remember your true identity, which can only be accessed in the beauty of the present moment. In the Course, we are taught that it is in the present moment, which is where we can accept what is known as the holy instant, a moment where we get in touch with the Holy Spirit and even connect to the God mind. We are taught in the Course that this instant is all there really is. There is no past or future. There is only now, an eternal present moment. When you are not distracted by the ego's version of the past and the future, you have the peacefulness of the now, where your mind is quiet, and you can then hear spirit and get in touch with your true identity. This is obviously very threatening to the ego, which requires your focus, and again, your belief. So the ego distracts you like a matador to a bull, so you don't rediscover the truth about yourself, that you are not the ego, and again, that you are perfectly innocent. Now, there are many ways the ego distracts you, and through anxious thinking is just one of them. You can think of anxiety as being the ego's defense mechanism from the truth. The trick is to recognize that this is why you are feeling anxious, because the ego wants your belief. It needs it. And all you have to do is practice gently turning your attention away from the anxious thoughts instead of fighting them or analyzing them. It's helpful to acknowledge that for as long as you have the ego in your mind, fear thoughts are going to pop up. So you just have to learn what to do with them so they are healed rather than reinforced. In this slide, you can see the dynamic of anxiety, which is played out in your mind and in your body. First, you have the ego thought. Then you judge the fear thought as real by believing in it. Then you feel the effects of your belief, which are an anxious stomach, tension in your body, a racing heart, and the like. Your mind then takes the physical reaction you are having as the evidence it needs to know that the anxious thought is real. This means that you are now taking another fear thought seriously, and the cycle of anxiety continues. This is the cycle you want to disrupt. At any point in the cycle, you can stop yourself from investing your mind's incredible power in it and take the appropriate steps to calm down and shift over to your right mind. I will be sharing ways that you can do this in just a bit, but it's helpful for you to know that your mind can only think one thought at a time, as I mentioned earlier. So if you are focused on calming down, you're not focused on fear. This is a habit you can easily create. It's also helpful to remember the Course teaching that you can be just as vigilant against ego thoughts as you are for them. Now let's get into how anxiety is maintained in your mind. We are taught in the Course that illusions are investments. They will last as long as you value them. Values are relative, but they are powerful because they are mental judgments. This statement again shows you how powerful your judgments are, and that every judgment you make is not some just passing thought which you will remain immune to. Your judgments are a testament to what you believe, and you will feel the effects of them. Anxious thoughts are judgments you are making, and they will feel real to you for as long as you keep valuing them. So we all know what it feels like to have anxious thoughts repeat. My sisters and I like to call these types of thoughts sticky thoughts. They seem to have a life of their own, and you just can't seem to shake them. Due to the discomfort that we feel having anxious thoughts, we do some things to help and calm them down or kick them out of our minds. The truth is, though, that our attempts to calm ourselves may very well be reinforcing the fear in our minds. Now, at the heart of each of the ways anxious thoughts are reinforced is the law of the mind that thoughts grow stronger the more you share them. This law of the mind is referring to repetition. So let's look at all the ways you are unintentionally repeating anxious thoughts. First up, anxious thoughts are repeated through reassurance seeking. When you're anxious, you may find yourself seeking reassurance that whatever you're anxious about isn't going to come true. You look for answers to the fear thought outside of yourself. This is a mistake because you are saying that something outside of you can hurt you, when in truth, the whole world is coming from your mind. Remember the law of cause and effect. The world is an effect, a projection of your mind. If you have a fear thought, looking outside of yourself to feel better is not going to help you, because that is not where the error was made. The error was made in your mind, and that is where it needs to be corrected. So you may seek reassurance by looking up what you're afraid about on the internet or by asking others what their opinion is, and you hope that someone will say something that will make you feel better and relieve your fears. Yet all this does is keep the fear thought alive in your mind, for instead of correcting your fear thoughts, you are reinforcing the idea that what you are anxious about can indeed hurt you. The next way you unintentionally reinforce fear is by trying to defend yourself from the fear itself. Your defenses against your fears say again that whatever you are afraid of can hurt you. And we are taught in the course that for every defense we make against our fears, the stronger the fear becomes. Another way you reinforce fear is by sharing your story. This is a common thing for anxious people to do. Telling anyone who will listen what they are anxious about and what the story is behind the fear. And all of this just keeps the ego identity in place. It keeps you stuck in your ego story. As long as you believe that you are what the ego would say, you are not making room for your true identity to come to your awareness. And finally, another way you reinforce anxiety is by analyzing each anxious thought which creeps up. You may look up what you are afraid of, dissect why you are afraid of whatever you are anxious about, and pick apart ways the world would say your fear is valid. These are the most common ways you are working against yourself and keeping yourself in an anxious state of mind. The fact is, as long as you are focusing on stopping the fear thought from manifesting, you are not taking the appropriate steps to calm yourself and correct the trajectory of your thinking. So to heal from anxiety, you have to stop investing in it. Personally, to help with this, I like to reframe the anxious thought in the light that it's trying to catch my attention, so I can correct my thinking and begin to recognize my true identity as spirit. So it's always helpful to reframe things in the light of spirit, which is all things are there to help us heal and to remember. Things are not meant to bring us down as the ego would have us believe. Now we have covered where anxiety comes from, what the ego purpose of anxiety is, the cycle of fear, and how you maintain fear in your mind. Now let's get into how we can heal from anxiety. As shared in the earlier slide, healing from anxiety is about stopping your investment in fear thoughts. This is a practice, a habit which you will need to create. When you stop your reaction to anxious thoughts, it is then vital that you ask the Holy Spirit to take over judgment of the anxious thought for you. It is helpful for you to remind yourself that you, just like the rest of us, do not know how to judge. So try not to get caught up in judging the anxious thoughts which pop up. You simply need to practice handing your thinking over to the Holy Spirit. Now, before I go any further into this very important topic of getting on board with the Holy Spirit, I want to share a very important teaching from the course, which I have shared before in my other classes. The teaching I want to highlight is this, that Jesus tells us not to ask Him to save us from fear. Jesus, or anyone, including the Holy Spirit, cannot interject between a thought and its effects. The law of cause and effect is the most fundamental law there is, and cause and effect are essentially one. So if you have the thought and you take it seriously, you're going to feel the effects, which may be the most uncomfortable part of fear. So it's important to remember that cause and effect go hand in hand. So instead of asking Jesus or the Holy Spirit to save you from fear, Jesus states that it is far more effective to remind you that you do not guard your thoughts carefully enough. He reminds us of the power of our minds and that it is us who need to be more careful with where we are investing our belief. As is stated by Jesus in his course, I have already indicated that you cannot ask me to release you from fear. I know it does not exist, but you do not. If I intervened between your thoughts and their results, I would be tampering with a basic law of cause and effect, the most fundamental law there is. I would hardly help you if I depreciated the power of your own thinking. This would be in direct opposition to the purpose of this course. It is much more helpful to remind you that you do not guard your thoughts carefully enough. So Jesus, in his course, is reinforcing for us the power of our minds. Remember that this is about training your mind, not minimizing the power of your mind and hiding from it. If you want to heal from anxiety, it is vital that you acknowledge the power of your mind and also acknowledge that you have just been misusing your mind and that you no longer need to keep misusing it. Asking Spirit for help, then, will always result in an answer that will remind you of how powerful your mind is, and that it is up to you to correct your thinking by asking the Holy Spirit to correctly judge things for you. Asking for help correctly means that you are no longer willing to do things alone, and recognizing that you genuinely need help. So instead of reinforcing the separation by doing things on your own, you unify with the Holy Spirit, which is reflective of your natural state of being, which is one with your source. At the beginning of this class, I mentioned that A Course in Miracles is a course in mind training. To heal from anxiety, you need to take genuine steps to discipline your mind. Training your mind is a daily commitment, and it's important to acknowledge that you are worth your commitment to heal. The fact is, the anxiety you're experiencing is only so prevalent because you are letting your powerful mind feed into the anxious thoughts. Jesus teaches us in the Course that allowing our minds to race and all of our tangential thinking is a choice we are making. We are choosing to think that way. He is also quick to remind us that just as we think that way, we can think with the Holy Spirit. As I mentioned earlier, Jesus teaches us that we can be just as vigilant against the ego's dictates as we are for them. So when you catch yourself feeling anxious, it's best to remind yourself that it is happening because you have chosen it. But remember, this is the power of the decision maker. It is not something that's happening to you. Anxiety is something that is happening by you. And as the decision maker, you can stop that process. But as Jesus teaches us, we are too preoccupied with our own voices, which would be the ego's voice. We made the ego, and so we think that what it says is true and worth our time. Yet it's not. The ego's voice is not your true identity and keeps you locked in a false and conflict-filled thought system. So to be free of it, you must step out of it. So how do you step out of the ego's thought system? Well, first you want to acknowledge that when you are feeling anxious, it is because you have simply made a mistake in your thinking. It's not something to feel guilty about, it's just something to recognize. This would be a good time to implement some coping mechanisms to help you relax. You can begin by simply sitting down and deepening your breathing. When you are focusing on breathing in and breathing out slowly, you are not focused on the anxious thought because your mind, again, can only focus on one thought at a time. So you can actually distract yourself for a minute while you calm down and say, I breathe in, now I breathe out. The anxious thought may slip in as we are capable of switching our thinking quickly, but then I would suggest to just notice the thought. Try not to attach to it. Just continue focusing on your deep breathing. Then, when you feel a little calmer, you can try one of my favorite things, which is turning on something funny and lighthearted to either watch or listen to. Laughter has proven to be one of my greatest allies in healing from anxiety. This is because laughter helps you remember not to take things so seriously. And then you're in a more capable position to follow through on asking the Holy Spirit genuinely for his help. So just for a couple of minutes or however long you need, Really focus on what you are watching and remind yourself that the anxious thought will pass quicker if you stop paying attention to it. So the anxious thought still may try and nag at you, but remember that attaching to the anxious thought is a choice that you make and you don't need to go there. Once you feel calmer, it will be easier to connect with the Holy Spirit. And especially if you've been watching something funny, then that helps you feel happier. This is because you are no longer feeling totally hijacked by the ego mind and you are able to switch over to your right mind. As Albert Einstein taught, a problem cannot be solved from the same state of mind which created the problem. So it is absolutely vital that you find some calming coping mechanisms that you like, which you can use to help you when you're feeling anxious, so you can step out of ego mode. Once you've done that, you want to ask the Holy Spirit to judge the anxious thought for you. This is something that I mentioned earlier, and it is incredibly important. Remember, we do not know how to judge, and that's a good thing to remind ourselves of. I don't know how to judge, so Holy Spirit, I hand this totally over to you for judgment. And upon handing your anxious thoughts over to the Holy Spirit, you want to conclude by accepting the atonement for yourself. As a reminder, the atonement is the one corrective idea which undoes all ego ideas. And the atonement principle is this: I never left my source. So simply remind yourself of that. I never left my source. I am safe and one in my source. I am innocent and nothing happened. Or you can, of course, come up with some ideas along these lines that help you connect with your source. But in this final corrective step, it's helpful to take a moment to feel love. If even just for a second, do this and you will be light years ahead than if you were not to apply the atonement at all. The atonement is very important. For remember, we are also taught in the Course that the truth, which is the atonement, will correct all errors in our minds. You can also use the exercise lovingly known as the page 90 exercise. It is at the very end of chapter 5 and in italics, and it is essentially the same corrective thinking process which I just laid out. First, you stop yourself from continuing to react to the ego, which can be done by applying some calming techniques like the deep breathing or putting on something funny. And then second, give whatever you are anxious about over to the Holy Spirit for loving correction. And third, taking a moment to remind yourself of the truth that you are innocent, safe in your source. With practice, these 3 steps will produce some incredible healing results. I've been using them for years. Remember, you are worth applying them, and they will feel much better than continuing to think with the ego. And finally, here are some lessons from the Course which are particularly helpful for correcting anxious thoughts. I strongly encourage you to read through these lessons in your copy of the Course and try to soak in the words and what Jesus is teaching. Just quickly though, before we get into these lessons, I want to encourage you to, throughout your day, become aware of the words you are using to describe yourself and your story around anxiety. Essentially, you want to change the messages you're giving yourself. Some helpful thoughts you can use are, the strength of God flows through my mind. I will use God's strength instead of the ego's. Another helpful idea you can remind yourself when you feel anxious is that anxiety, again, is just a mistake in your thinking, and mistakes are meant to be corrected. Another helpful reminder is that you are worthy of the thoughts of God, and that there is no need for you to settle for anxious thoughts. And lastly, you can always remind yourself of your ability to choose again. Remember that your right mind is always available to you and that the Holy Spirit responds fully to the slightest call. You are not alone in this. You literally have the strength of God to care for you. So stop doing things alone. Now let's take a brief look at these ACIM lessons and how they can help you. First off, lesson 48. There is nothing to fear. This may seem like a simplistic idea, but we are taught with this lesson that when we say these words, that there is nothing to fear, a part of our mind is recognizing that this is true. It helps you detach from the idea that fear is somehow more powerful than you are. Practice this idea even when you're calm, as the idea will grow stronger within you and you can recall it with greater ease when you are feeling anxious. The next helpful lesson is lesson 135. If I defend myself, I am attacked. This is an incredible lesson, and again, I strongly urge you to read through it when you get the chance. It is a few pages. One of the best parts of this lesson is this quote here. What could you not accept if you but knew that everything that happens, all events, past, present, and to come, are gently planned by one whose only purpose is your good? To me, this quote cuts the fear out of the future. Remember that the Holy Spirit is perfectly sane and knows what is best for you and for everyone. So when you are feeling anxious, you can remind yourself of this lesson, that the Holy Spirit has gently planned the events and that these events will only ever benefit you. The key is you have to accept the Holy Spirit's script over the ego's. And the next helpful lesson is the final lesson in the course, which is really a declaration to the Holy Spirit. And it states, "This holy instant would I give to you. Be you in charge, for I would follow you, certain that your direction gives me peace." Again, there's that instantaneous feeling of peace, trust, and even confidence that everything truly is okay. This is such an awesome lesson to apply when you're feeling anxious, and I really encourage you to give it a try. Remember that in order to heal from anxiety, you need to deal with the unconscious guilt in your mind. Every time you apply true forgiveness, which is the 3 steps I outlined for you, and is also given in the page 90 exercise at the end of chapter 5, a part of your mind is healed. You are never wasting your time when you apply true forgiveness. Apply it when you're calm, so you do it correctly, which really means that you follow through on all 3 steps with genuine sincerity. Also remember that this is about training your mind. Doing the course lessons and really applying them to your life is going to serve you greatly. You can learn to be miracle-minded, so let yourself be the miracle worker you came here to be. I want to thank you so dearly for watching this class, and I truly do hope it was helpful for you. God's will for you is perfect happiness, so when you are feeling anxious, remember that God's will is stronger than the ego's will, and let yourself get to a place of peace with the help of the Holy Spirit. To conclude, I want to end with this section from chapter 7 of the course. Do not be afraid of the ego. It depends on your mind, and as you made it by believing in it, so you can dispel it by withdrawing belief from it. Do not project the responsibility for your belief in it onto anyone else, or you will preserve the belief. When you are willing to accept sole responsibility for the ego's existence, you will have laid aside all anger and all attack, because they come from an attempt to project responsibility for your own errors. But having accepted the errors as yours, do not keep them. Give them over quickly to the Holy Spirit to be undone completely, so that all their effects will vanish from your mind and from the sonship as a whole.